Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome in to another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, and this is episode number 185 of the Baseball Podcast. We got a great show lined up for you today, giving you the latest report and update on Major League Baseball and the coronavirus plans for 2020. We'll then transition into an update with the MLB Players League, which has come to a conclusion here and crowned a champion as of Sunday night. We'll then talk about the National League Central. The best of the best. We'll continue that segment in segments 3 and 4. Then finish up with some simulation talk, baseball reference, Stratomatic on the tail end of the episode. But jumping right into it, guys. First off, if you saw my post on Facebook, I myself posted, as well as on the GSMC baseball page on Facebook. I just want to say thank you to you guys listening out there. I really appreciate everything that you guys are doing for the podcast. We are up in total traffic. For the month of April, the baseball podcast got 193,000 plus downloads. That's up 11% from the month of January, with over 171,000. So a bunch of you new listeners out there, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you guys joining the team since March or April when I came on board, continuing to spread the word around the podcast and the podcast network. I certainly appreciate it. But if you guys can continue to help me out, help each other out, spread the word to a family member or a friend who enjoys baseball, say, hey, check out this podcast. Kevin does a great job explaining what's going on and moving forward. It really helps the podcast network as well as myself. I wouldn't be able to get behind the microphone twice a week and give you guys quality content without you guys, the listeners out there. So I really do appreciate everything you're doing. Before we get into it again, shout out to all the healthcare workers. I want to talk about this at the top of the show as well. Everything you guys are doing out there on the front lines, continuing to battle the coronavirus and COVID-19. I found out a friend of mine's father was in the ICU on a ventilator for quite a bit of time, but it seems to be he is turning the corner and on his way to recovery, or at least they're very hopeful that is the case, but things can turn quickly. So, we're not so sure with that one, but continued prayers go out to my buddy, his father, and everything their family's dealing with, and everything that, these nurses, doctors, emergency personnel are dealing with here on the front line as well. So shout out to you guys once again. You guys are the real heroes out there. If you're listening to the podcast while you're working on the front line, send a picture into the Facebook page. Send it to the Twitter page. Show us you guys listening to the pod. We'll share those online. We'll continue to spread the word and be a big community here within the podcast network. So I'm very thankful for everybody out there, both listening to the pod and working on the front lines. But jumping into segment number 1 here, the latest report we have in regards to coronavirus plans in the 2020 season comes from Mark Topkin of the Tampa Bay Times. He reported that the, quote, preferred plan is to start in late June or July with as many teams as possible playing in their home ballparks. That's where I'd have to stop you, Mark. I mean, of course, that's the preferred plan. The preferred plan for Major League Baseball is to have everybody play in their home parks that are full of fans. It's just not a realistic plan, and I don't see at this point in time, first week here in May, how everybody playing in their home parks could be realistic at all. I guess there are certain states out there who are starting to open things up a little bit more and, test the water, so to speak. Hopefully things don't start to kind of increase and spread at a rapid rate once again. again, but that's not going to be everywhere. The city of New York is nowhere near having a baseball game within the grounds. Whether it's the Mets in Queens or the Yankees in the Bronx, there's no shot they're going to be able to play there at all this summer or even by this fall. I would be surprised with or without fans. So just that first point overall, I just feel Major League Baseball putting this out through Mark. It's like, dude, come on. There's no way that's going to happen. And they're continuing while competing in their regular divisions with a schedule of at least 80 games. Some teams will be in their home stadiums while some will not. And once again, you're going to allow half the league to play at home in their home stadiums where their families are living at home and don't need to travel very far. And then you're going to have the other half of the league who's not allowed back into their home stadiums yet, just down in spring training or at a neutral site field with the families living in hotels amongst other masses of individuals. Like, there's just no consistency, and it really doesn't make sense when it comes to, the Tampa Bay Rays are going to play at home, the Marlins are going to play at home, and then the Phillies, you'll be in Clearwater, at your spring training facility. I just don't see those lining up to be a really good plan. The preferred plan, once again, playing in home stadiums in the middle of summer, very much a stretch. If there's going to be baseball in 2020, there's going to have to be some form of centralization or thirds like they're talking about Florida, Texas, Arizona. I know the quarantine aspect of things could be tight, but if you allow access into a small city in and out, people aren't going to be away from their families for months on end. And that's where with hockey or basketball, if this was a sprint where it's the playoffs, you could probably get players to be away from their wives for a month, month and a half, 2 months tops if you're winning the title. But to talk about being away for a 3-month regular season as well as a potentially extended postseason, because you're only going to play 80, 85 games, which means you're going to allow more teams into the playoffs. It's just, you can't ask people, to be able to do that for 4 or 5 months on end. So, the preferred plan, having them play in their home stadiums, I'm sorry, local Philadelphia fans, I don't see the Phillies playing here anytime soon. August, September. I think September would be more realistic. If they're starting in July, I don't even know if they're going to be here at all, because if they're playing into November, December, they're going to need these warm weather climates. Be down in Florida, Texas, playing World Series games at neutral sites that are able to handle, the amount of players and staff that comes with putting on a game. So, one last thing I wanted to talk about here in regards to employees in the summer. One category of individuals we haven't talked about yet, but that's the umpires. And a report recently came out that Major League umpires, they came to an agreement with the MLB that they'll be getting 50% of their salary through the month of May. They were compensated for April. Now they're going to be 50% in May, and then nothing else moving forward unless games are played. Then they will be compensated on a prorated format, such as the players. If you play 100 out of 162, you'll get whatever that percentage is towards your salary and your typical pay. When it comes to travel, there's apparently been agreements made around arrangements where the players stay. That's where the umpires will stay if it is indeed a quarantine scenario or something along those lines. The retirement and the benefits that come with it, come with being an umpire, they will continue even though they may not get paid if there's not a season. The benefits will still continue. So I thought that was a nice little concession, obviously, by Major League Baseball. And then the last part is there seems to be an agreement where there's going to be no replay in 2020 because, once again, all of these teams are not going to be playing in their home ballparks, and these spring training parks or neutral site parks are not equipped or wired for replay, which means they're not going to get a great look at everything, as well as they don't want umpires huddling, putting on, the headphones, things like that, sharing that type of technology. So, zero replay will take place in 2020, and I found it interesting that looking back on all replay since 2014, I believe the date was, where replay was put into Major League Baseball. It has since expanded, but it started out in 2014, that almost half of all challenges have been overturned. So just under half have flipped, and basically shows you, hey, umpires get things wrong. Now, the amount of total overturns compared to total calls is nowhere close. They're probably 99% correct, 98% correct, but there are instances and big moments where it does make outcomes on the game. It affects what's going on. So there will be no replays at all in 2020 if there is baseball. That is the agreement that umpires in Major League Baseball came to. I found that to be very interesting. But once again, MLB wants people in their home stadiums as quickly as possible. I think we all do. I just don't think it's realistic till September, October, and then at that point you're talking about playoff baseball anyway, so it's not going to be everybody. And then the umpires, compensation, they come to an agreement, 0 replay in 2020, and in my opinion, don't be surprised if we see a designated hitter across the board this summer if there's baseball as well. But that wraps up the first segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate everybody listening out there. This is episode number 185 of the Baseball Podcast. We're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. When we come back on the flip side, however, I'm going to get you guys up to date on what happened in the Players League. We had a champion crowned this Sunday night, and spoiler alert, it is who you think it was. We'll talk to you guys soon.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco, ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, and this is episode number 185 of the Baseball Podcast. If you're just joining us, we talked about the latest with Major League Baseball and the coronavirus update, their plans on 2020. Not much has changed since last week, but a few recent tidbits that were worthy of discussion. And now in this segment, we're going to give you guys an update on MLB The Players League, the video game MLB The Show. One individual from every team representing themselves in a round-robin style, followed by playoff format, all 30 teams. It was a lot of fun, honestly. I wasn't sure going into this how much excitement or energy would be put into this event or if it'd be worthy of watching. It basically took place over the entire month of April, gave us a glimpse into baseball, allowed us to talk a little bit of baseball during these trying times when, we're grasping at anything here just to get, something back to discuss and something back on the diamond. But the end of the regular season, it found that the top 8 were indeed Blake Snell, Joey Gallo, Bo Bichette, Jeff McNeil. Dwight Smith Jr. was 5th. Number 6, Lucas Giolito. Number 7, Ian Happ. And number 8, Gavin Lux. And then 6 through 8 were all 19 and 10, which was one game better than Cannell and May at 18 and 11 to make the playoffs. And they were ranked based on, I believe, run differential. It was runs scored followed by runs allowed. So it wasn't run differential. It was runs scored and then runs allowed. Was the tiebreaker there, but it basically made Gavin Lux the 8th seed. He went up against Blake Snell. He put up a good fight. Gavin Lux was a good ball player and had success early on, but then as other players continued to improve, and there were a lot of players that got better throughout the entire month. Play 29 games of anything, and you're going to be better in game 29 than you were in game 2. Well, that was clearly evident as we see somebody makes a run a little bit later here. But when it came to Snell and Lux wasn't as good as making those adjustments and, carrying on play, but gave Snell a run for his money. These were best 2 out of 3. Game 1, Snell won 3-2. Game 2, Snell won 5-4 for a 2-0 series win and advancing into the semifinals. Next up, we had number 2, Joey Gallo against number 7, Ian Happ. And this was our first surprise. I talked about a potential upset last episode, the old 12-5, 13-4 game. Well, it looked like Joey Gallo was on his way with a 3-2 victory in game 1. However, Ian Happ came back in game 2 with a 4-3 victory, which ultimately led to a deciding game 3 in which Happ, he got out to an early start, ended up winning the game 7-0. And you could see Joey was very upset at the time. He was trying to maintain composure for everybody watching on national television, but he was genuinely pissed. He was not happy with what happened there and being ousted in the first round after going 23-6 during the regular season. He gets beat twice in the best 2 out of 3. Next up, we had our 3-seed Bo Bichette against the 6-seed Lucas Giolito from the Chicago White Sox. And another upset in round 1. Let's see. Game 1, Giolito won 3-2. Bo Bichette came back with a 1-0 victory to force a game 3. And then the upset in game 3. Giolito 5, Bo Bichette 3. And Giolito, he was one of those individuals who was tied at 19-10, but you could clearly see improved from his first games until the end, and that's why he was able to beat Bo Bichette, who clearly, again, being a younger contestant, plays MLB The Show on a regular basis. So Giolito bounced back and was able to advance in the first round. Your last quarterfinal matchup was between Jeff McNeil of the New York Mets and Dwight Smith Jr. of the Baltimore Orioles. Smith Jr., certainly one of the more entertaining individuals, especially when playing with himself, and he found himself having a lot of success when he was playing, and that's where it was fun, watching somebody play a video game and hitting home runs and being like, oh yeah, that's actually me. It was fun. But McNeil, the 4 seed, he was able to take care of business in a few low scoring games. He won game 1 3-2 and then game 2 3-1. So that pitching staff for the Mets really comes through and helps him advance to the semifinals. But in regards to the playoffs and in the format here, they did not reseed between the quarterfinals and the semifinals. Depending on which sport it is you follow, they, if they go 1 through 8, I believe it was hockey for a while, would reseed, and then you would play based on the higher seed. The Flyers, as the 7-8, were able to get home ice during one of the playoff runs. Well, this was more of a bracket formation as to where number 1, Blake Snell, matched up against number 4, Jeff McNeil instead of number 7, Ian Happ. And then on the other side of the bracket, you had number 6 versus number 7, Giolito versus Happ. So a little bit of a top-heavy matchup when it came to the semifinals, and you knew at least a 6 seed was ultimately going to make a run and be Cinderella to make it all the way to the finals. So in the first semifinal matchup, Blake Snell versus Jeff McNeil, game 1, it was the surprise. McNeil 4-1. That was the surprise of the tournament up until this point. I know we've had upsets over there, but Snell really running through his opponents at this point. Wasn't sure if anybody was going to be able to beat him. Well, Snell apparently got upset and refocused in between matchups because that Mets pitching that had given up 2 runs, 1 run, and 1 run, they got walloped the next couple of games. Blake Snell came back, won 8-0 in game 2, and then 7-0 in game 3. So McNeil puts up a 4 spot in game 1 and then can't get on the board in games 2 and 3 with Snell and that pitching staff in Tampa Bay, and really the depth of the rotation showed out there in games 2 and 3. And holding McNeil scoreless really didn't stand a chance. So Blake Snell, the 1 seed, advances to the finals. Again, he had a regular season of 24-5, and then being 4-1 up until this point, that makes him 28-6 on the year. We go over to the other semifinals where it was 2 Cinderellas, where they were going to find out ultimately which one fit into the shoe that was going to make it to the finals. Let's see, we had Ian Happ and Lucas Giolito. Game 1, Giolito was on top 8-4, a hitter's match up there in game 1. Then it was followed up by a pitcher's duel in game 2, a 1-0 win by Ian Happ. And both of these guys, again, were 19-10 in the regular season. Both won the first round in 3 games, going again to a decisive game 3 here in the semifinals, where Giolito ultimately pulled it out 3-1. The pitching depth for Chicago was able to come through and hold Happ to only 1 run in game 3. After 1 run was enough in game 2, Giolito was able to make the adjustments offensively and get back into the winner's circle. So that led us to a finals matchup of number 1 Blake Snell versus number 6 Lucas Giolito. Giolito, again, being one of those guys who early on struggled. Blake Snell hammered him earlier in the regular season. These two actually played the test matchup before this entire tournament started as well. So this was their 5th or 6th and 7th times playing against each other. They had a little bit of familiarity to themselves. And watching this one today on Sunday, May 3rd, this really wasn't that close from the start. Game 1, it was 5-1 Blake Snell, but he put up a 3 spot in the first inning, and these are only 3-inning games. So a quick start is extra crucial. It goes up 3-0, wins the game 5-1. Then in game 2, Giolito was able to bounce back, throw the ball a little bit better, but Blake Snell still found a way to win 3-2 at home in Tampa Bay, winning both of those home games. Then they go on the road, and the pitching depth, the Sox just don't have the starters to run with Tampa Bay, and Blake Snell won the series 3-0. This was a best of 5 in the championship series, and it was a 3-0 sweep for Blake Snell as he won game 3 6-0. So Snell finishes 7-1 in the playoffs. His overall record is 31-6. Clearly impressive, clearly plays the show in his free time, and he was also very entertaining. So shout out to Blake Snell for not only being good at real baseball, being good at video game baseball, and then also being entertaining along the way, because if you're going to be one of the guys we have to watch, you might as well have to keep us entertained. But shout out to all the guys who participated in this, even the guys at the bottom of the list who weren't very good and got beat around. It was a nice little break from baseball, and a nice behind the scenes peek into a lot of these guys' kind of lives and personalities and things like that. So shout out to baseball for another successful event. Hopefully they can continue that into the on-field product in 2020. But that wraps up the second segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We're going to pause once again here for a word from one of our sponsors, as well as one of our sister shows within the network. We got 30 shows within the network about all different types of genres, books, news, anything you can think of, we got a podcast for you. So definitely check those out as well. But hang with us here when we come back on the flip side. We're talking the best of the best, the National League Central. You're going to want to hear it. Stick around.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am Kevin Mahalik, your host as always. Thank you once again for listening here on Monday, May 4th. Cinco de Mayo's coming up tomorrow. Hopefully you're enjoying from your home. I wish we could get together, have a little bit of fun, and that Corona was the drink we were going to consume and not the virus we were all worried about. I know it's kind of a played out joke. That's really why I didn't try to nail it and deliver it for you guys. But it's true, man. Hopefully you can enjoy yourselves, a couple of cold ones, or if you're not a drinker, just enjoying the weather wherever you are. In the greater Philadelphia area, we hit 75 plus this weekend for the first time. First time in the 70s all year. I know you guys back closer to the Golden State. Sarah behind the scenes, who I'm working with here to post the videos, let me know that their air conditioning's been on. It's been hot out there. So we finally were able to hit that mark here on the East Coast as well. But I appreciate you guys listening out there. If you haven't done so already, head to the social media pages, head to our Facebook page, our Twitter. We post new content there, share articles, thoughts, what we're going to talk about on the show. We post links to the show there as well. You can help spread the word on Facebook as you guys continue to grow this podcast. And I'm thankful for you guys once again. Every one of you listening, all 193,000 downloads in April. Shout out to you guys. You guys are the best. But here in the third segment, we're talking about the best of the best, as always, as we've moved to the NL Central and the top versions of every team here. So top to bottom, let's start out with the Chicago Cubs. The Chicago Cubs, their third best team ever was 2003. Yes, that year. I was like, was that year? Oh yeah, it was that year. It's the Steve Bartman year. 88 wins, lost the NLCS in 7 games. Should have advanced, could have advanced. It's just, man, a tough break for them in 2003. Next up was the 1984 team. 96 wins. They also got to the NLCS before bowing out of the playoffs. 96 is a great ball club. But the best version of the Cubs, again, because we're talking 1970s on, isn't, the ones back from the teens, the 1900s. Fly the W. It's the 2016 103 win version that ultimately was crowned World Series champs in 7 games over the Cleveland Indians. So that was an easy one. 2016, 103 wins, a loaded ball club who finally had a parade in Chicago for all the Cubs fan who suffered for a long, long time. But easy decision there, 2016 Cubbies. Next up, we got the Cincinnati Reds. They have a couple of different versions. This one was a little bit difficult. This is a unique experience that happens twice in this division. And I don't remember it happening more than once or twice throughout the course of all of the rest of the teams. If it did, I think it was the Sox, the Yankees, those types of teams. But the Cincinnati Reds, the top 3 versions, all World Series champs. So now the discussion is, what version of the World Series champs was the best version of the Reds? And particularly between the top 2, I think some of you guys out there are going to have some thoughts. So let me know on Facebook, message me on Twitter if, I picked the wrong decision. But number 3, the 1990 World Series champions, Cincinnati Reds, they had 91 wins that year, which is why I had them ultimately third behind these next 2 teams. And then in second place, 1975. Yes, they had 108 wins, the most in team history, more than the next team I will read, World Series champions. But I've been a proponent that repeating is more difficult than, actually the first time. And that's where the 1976 Reds, who won 102 games that year, but went 7-0 in the postseason as well. They were World Series champions after sweeping, I believe it was the New York Yankees. So the 1976 Reds are the best version ever of the Big Red Machine. But I've heard talk between 75 and 76. I'm going 76 because they were repeating and swept the postseason. Next up, the Milwaukee Brewers. Third place, we have the 2011 version. They ultimately ended up losing in the NLCS. They had 96 wins that year, which is tied for a franchise high. Next up, the most recent version, or a relatively recent version, 2018. They lost the NLCS that year as well. 96 wins, and unfortunately the Brewers never won a World Series. So the top team, 1982. Where they ended up losing the World Series. And this turns out to be very, very interesting because we have another 1982 version of a team here that's to be determined. Stick around. You guys will find out. But the top Milwaukee Brewers team ever, 1982. Their only World Series appearance and 95 regular season wins. The Pittsburgh Pirates. Man, another conversation between the top 2. That was very, very interesting. I did some research. Other people have talked about it. It's been discussed, believe me. But starting out with their third best version, 1991, losing the NLCS, 98 regular season victories, a good squad there. But the top 2 are obviously their 2 World Series championship teams. One in 1971, another in 1979. Which one is the better version? There are arguments to be made both ways. Ultimately, I have number 2, the 1979 Pittsburgh Pirates. They had 98 regular season wins, were World Series champions. The 1971 team had 97 wins, was also World Series champions. But I just think Roberto Clemente of the 91 team, the 71 team, puts them over the top, over the Willie Stargell, I believe it was, at first base for 1979's version. I almost said McCovey, but no, he's out west. So the Pittsburgh Pirates, 1971, the best version of the team for them. And lastly here, we have the St. Louis Cardinals, the 2006 version. Or wait, before I get into it, this is the second team in the division where all three are World Series champions, winning multiple championships. However, two of the least amount of regular season wins for World Series champions are also St. Louis Cardinals. Now, there was a team in 2006 that won 83 games or 84 games, I believe it was, and went on to win the World Series. And if you look it up, they're arguably the worst team ever to be crowned World Series champions. I remember watching them, and they were a good ball club, but I guess it's the least amount of regular season victories to be crowned World Series champion. Maybe not the worst of the worst, but the least amount of regular season victories, definitely. And next up, we had 2011, the most recent title for the Cardinals. They had 90 wins during that regular season, which was also a low amount for a World Series champion. So they had two of the lower regular season victories for ultimate champions there in 2011 and 2006. But you get hot in the postseason, you make a run. Again, they beat the Phillies in the first round in 5 games, who were the 1 seed and 100+ victories. It's just, oh God, it makes me so upset thinking back about it. But moving on. So this is the interesting part. The best team in Cardinals history, the 1982 World Series champions. They had 92 wins that year. And how did they play the Milwaukee Brewers? They're in the same division. Well, Milwaukee used to be in the American League in 1982. That was before my time. I don't even think I knew that, to be honest with you. I remember them in the NL Central. That's all I remember. I was going to say as long as I can remember. Well, they played a 7-game World Series that year. St. Louis ultimately wins the World Series. Milwaukee loses it in their only appearance. And it's arguably both teams' top version of their teams in franchise history. Just amazing. And we're going to get into that more in the next segment when we discuss some individuals and ultimately where I rank them 1 through 5. But running through it again, the 2016 Chicago Cubs, 103 wins, World Series champions. The 1976 Cincinnati Reds, 102 wins, World Series champions. The Milwaukee Brewers 1982 team, 95 wins but losing the World Series. The 1971 Pittsburgh Pirates with 97 wins, World Series champions. And then the 1982 Cardinals with 92 wins and World Series champions. So stick around after a word from one of our sponsors as well as one of our sister shows here within the GSMC Podcast Network. Our next segment, I will rank these guys, numbers 1 through 5, ultimately where I think they would finish if they were to all play the same season. And then as we continue around the league, we'll eventually get into some playoffs, and we're going to be crowning the best of the best and who I think the best Major League team ever is. But before we do that, I'll ask you one more time to head to social media, give us a like, a subscribe, rate, review. No reviews this past week on the podcast to read for you guys here on air. I always like to share those when somebody leaves a review, gives their take. Ask us a question. That's probably one of the easiest way to get on the show here. Ask us a question. We'll discuss it. We'll talk about it. We'll give you a shout out. But, yeah, that wraps up the third segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Hang on, guys. On the flip side, we're going to rank these guys 1 through 5. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. This is your host, Kevin Mahalik, and this is my favorite segment of the show. If you're new to today's episode, go back the last couple of weeks. We've been doing this all around Major League Baseball, but in this segment, this is where I rank 1 through 5, the best of the best. In today's episode, it's the National League Central. Reds, Pirates, Cubs, Cardinals, Brewers, talking 1 through 5, where if the best of the best played each other all in the same season, ultimately, where would they be ranked? And if you listen to last episode or last segment, you guys know 2 of these teams are from 1982. Well, because of that fact, I put them both at number 5 and number 4. Number 5 is obviously the losing team of that World Series in 1982, and that is the Milwaukee Brewers, coming in this 5th spot. They were led that year in 1982 by Ted Simmons behind the dish. He hit .269, had 23 homers, 91 RBIs. Cecil Cooper at first base. Cecil Cooper, whichever one he went by. 32 homers, 121 RBIs. Robin Yount at shortstop. 29 homers, 114. And then Ben Oglivie. I don't know that one. Oh, man. Sorry, somebody's going to have to let me know. Oglivie, 34 and 102 out in left field. Gorman Thomas had 39 and 112. So plenty of power for the Milwaukee Brewers this year. Let's see, top averages, 331 goes to Robin Yount, 295. Jim Gartner had good years offensively, as well as off the bench. Don Money, Marshall Edwards playing in a bunch of games for them, getting a couple of big hits for the Brewers that year. But transitioning onto the mound, they had Mike Caldwell, 17 and 13, a 3.91 ERA. Pete Vukovich, 18 and 6, 3.34. Moose Haas, Ben McClure, Randy Lurch. The Raleigh Fingers was the closer for this team. He shows up here as well. 79 innings, a 2.6 ERA. Jim Slanton, I don't know why I just messed that up the first time. He went 10 and 6 and 117 innings out of the bullpen. So a good club for Milwaukee in 1982 in their own World Series appearance before they fell to the St. Louis Cardinals, who are the best Cardinals team in team history. Let's check out some of their individual statistics starting out offensively. Darryl Porter behind the dish, hitting .231, 12 homers, 48 RBIs. George Hendrick, 19 homers, 104 RBIs out in right field. And then a lot of contact. Gentleman Lonnie Smith hit .307. Ken Okerfell hit .289. Keith Hernandez, .299. Willie McGee in center hit .296. Just a lot of contact hitters making things tough on the defense. On paper, the Brewers looked like they had the better ball club, but, they fell in 7 games to this Cardinals team here. Off the bench, they had Dan Jorg hitting .294 in over 102 games. On the mound, they had Joe Queen Andujar, 15 and 10, 2.47 ERA. Bob Forsch, 15 and 9, 3.48. Steve Mura, 12 and 11 with a 4.05 ERA. John Stuper, 3.36. Closing things out, Bruce Sutter, 9 and 8 with a 2.90 ERA. And then Dave LaPointe had 152 innings pitched out of the bullpen, pitched to a 3.4 ERA. A good ball club there, but certainly not up to the likes of these next couple of teams that we're going to be talking about. So, numbers 1 through 3, I had a little bit more of a discussion on. Ultimately, I think I got them in the right spot. I tried to not have recency bias, hence the third place finish for the 2016 Chicago Cubs. I think those 2 teams in the 70s will be at the top of this division. But for the Cubs in 2016, Miguel Montero behind the dish. He struggled a little bit, but stabilized him behind there. Anthony Rizzo at first base had 32, 109, hit .292 that year. Ben Zobrist, .272. Let's see, Addison Russell, Chris Bryant, 39 home runs, 102 RBIs, hit .292, had a really good year for them. Javier Baez at shortstop, 59 RBIs, 14 home runs, hitting .273 in 142 games. Jason Hayward struggled, but they had Dexter Fowler performing well. He had 13 steals, they're high in stolen bases behind Javier Baez. Jorge Soler out in left field. Let's see, coming off the bench, Wilson Contreras, David Ross, Matt Caesar. Shout out Matt Caesar. I played against Caesar in college. He was at Villanova University. Villanova known mostly for basketball for those most recent NCAA titles in 2016 and 2018. But Matt Caesar, he was a football star as well as a baseball star. Our times overlapped in college. I got him out a couple times. He also hit a double off me that the only reason it wasn't a home run is because I don't think it ever got above the height of the fence. He hit a line drive that stayed about 10 feet off the ground the entire way until it just hit the fence and didn't make it out of there. But the pitching for the Cubs, John Lester, 19-5, 2.44 ERA, strong year for Lester. Jake Arrieta was still dealing at this point, 18-8, 3.10 ERA. Kyle Hendricks, 16-8, smart boy, Dartmouth, 2.13 ERA. John Lackey at the tail end of his career at 37 years old was still strong, finishing with 188 innings pitched. Jason Hamill, Hector Rondon was the closer. 3.53 ERA, but they also traded for Aroldis Chapman down the stretch, who had a 1.01 ERA in 26 innings for them. Trevor Cahill, Travis Wood, a lot of good pieces, but they're going to fall short of these next couple of clubs in the 1970s. Now it's between the 76 Reds and the 71 Pirates. Ultimately, who would win? I think it's a great discussion. And if you guys want to give your opinion, I'm up for hearing it here, whether it's in the comments or on Facebook or Twitter, wherever it may be. Let me know where you think these two would rank. But number 2, I got the 1971 Pittsburgh Pirates. I have them coming in second place. Let's see here, looking at some of their statistics offensively. Bob Robertson at first base, 24 years old, had 26 homers, 72 RBIs, hit .271. Dave Cash at second had a nice average going. Let's see here. Willie Stargell, 48 homers, 125 RBIs, hit .295 in left field for him. Just a tremendous year from Willie Stargell, ultimately one of the reasons why they did win it in 71. As well as Roberto Clemente. Let's see. Stargell was only 30, or he was 31. Clemente was 36 at this point. He hit .341. He had 13 homers, 86 RBIs. Still just a great at-bat, and ultimately the reason why I picked them over the 79 Pirates there with Willie Stargell and Roberto Clemente is what I meant to say last segment, not against each other, which I believe is what I said. So I apologize for that last segment here. But as well as off the bench, games played, Gene Kleins, Jackie Hernandez coming off the bench for him. And from the pitching side of things, Steve Bias, he went 15-8 with a 2.85 ERA in 240 innings. Doc Ellis, 19-9, 3.06 ERA in 22.6 innings. Bob Johnson, Luke Walker as well in the starting rotation. Then we have Bob Moose, Nelson Briles, Mudcat Grant. What a great name that is. Mudcat Grant coming in from the bullpen at 5-3, 3.6 ERA. Nelson Briles had 136 innings pitched. Just really strong for the Pirates there in 1971. But the best of the best in the NL Central, I have the 1976 Reds. Led by Johnny Bench behind the ditch, 28 years old, 16 home runs, 74 RBIs. Tony Perez at first base. Joe Morgan at second base, hitting .320 with 27 and 111 RBIs and an OPS over 1,000. Great year from Joe Morgan at age 32. Pete Rose at third base at age 35, hitting .323. Only 10 homers and 63 RBIs, but an OBP of .404. So still getting on base at a tremendous clip at age 35 for the 76 Reds. George Foster had 29 and 121, leading the team in RBIs out in left field, hitting .306. Cesar Garamino hitting .307. Ken Griffey, senior that is. I almost said junior just by habit, but Ken Griffey Sr. hit .336 that year as well. Dan Driesen, Doug Flynn coming off the bench here, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys hitting over .306. Just tremendous and something you don't see in today's baseball game. So I, very impressed when I saw that from the offensive perspective. And no easy outs. OBPs over 4, 1, 2, 3 guys just on base factory for the Big Red Machine. And from a pitching side, Gary Nolan, 15-9, 3.46 ERA. Pat Zachary, 14-7, 2.74 ERA. Fred Norman, 12-7, 3.09 ERA. Jack Billingham, let's see here. Pedro Borbon, 4-3 and 121 innings. And then Raleigh Eastwick, 11-5, a 2.09 ERA and 107 innings. Coming out of the bullpen to shut things down for the Big Red Machine. But a tremendous division. Everybody besides the Brewers ultimately were World Series champions at one point or another, with the two teams in the 70s, I think, really separating themselves. But we'll see if the 2016 Cubs have any shot at the playoffs after next episode, where we'll talk about the National League West, the best of the best, and then we'll discuss the playoffs and ultimately crown a champion within the next couple of weeks. So you guys are going to want to continue to listen to find out who ultimately wins the tournament bracket here. But that wraps up the fourth segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always. Coming up next segment, we're going to discuss the simulations, the supercomputers, the smart guys, where they have everybody. We're going to talk about the differences between Stratomatic and Baseball Reference. So stick around. We'll have a fun conversation.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. Shout out to all the new listeners we have out there. We talked about it at the top of today's episode. We had an increase of 11% in regards to total monthly downloads from the month of April, up from the month of January. So shout out to every one of you guys, you new listeners out there who have joined the podcast this past month or the month of March and joined me for the ride here within the podcast network. I appreciate all the positive feedback we've been getting, whether it's reviews on Apple Podcast, messages via Facebook, or DMs via Twitter. Shout out to you guys for always being positive and helping me push forward. And the reason I get to do what I'm doing now is because you guys enjoy listening to the product I put out there. So continue the messages, continue segments you guys want to hear, content. Hopefully sooner than later, we'll have some real baseball to discuss. It looks like we may be about a month away, another 4 to 6 weeks potentially, before we actually get some spring training action. If they're getting back in the month of June or early July, 2 weeks prior to, probably have a spring training. So we're a month away here, but fingers crossed everything continues to work in a positive manner. Shout out to all the healthcare workers once again for everything you guys are doing. But let's dive in here into the simulations that are continuing every day via Stratomatic and Baseball Reference. I enjoy staying updated on where they think these teams are going to finish, and you can kind of keep track of some of the runs that have been happening here recently. But starting right out in the standings, New York, Tampa Bay, opening up a nice lead in the AL East for Stratomatic. The same can be said for Baseball Reference, but the Rays are quite a bit behind the Yankees. The Yankees are 25-10. Very impressive, according to Baseball Reference, with the Rays right around 500, a few games back, 9 games back, it looks like there. Transitioning into the American League Central, the Minnesota Twins and the Kansas City Royals have made a run here in Stratomatic, as well as the Cleveland Indians. So 3 teams having strong starts and playoff aspirations, according to Stratomatic. Transitioning over to Baseball Reference, they're still having the White Sox there at the top of the division. They agree with the Indians. The Royals, not so much. The Twins starting to figure things out, but the White Sox are the one team that these two computers disagree with. I tend to think that they could make a little bit of a run here this year for the first time in quite a bit of time, be competitive potentially for the length of the season and not just early on. The AL West, Houston Astros, Oakland Athletics, 1-2 in Stratomatic. It's tough to disagree with what they got going here on the Stratomatic side. Yankees, Houston, Tampa, Oakland, those are four kind of locks. Minnesota at the top to repeat. Then you got Cleveland and Kansas City battling there for a potential playoff spot. So I think they're spot on with what we got going. And then if you look here at Baseball Reference, they have Houston closer to 500. I think they're maybe taking into account what's happened in the past couple of off seasons, this past off season in particular with the release of the punishment for everybody. They think they may struggle out of the gate at 18-16 with the Oakland A's at the top of the list. And then they're surprised, the Mariners. So the White Sox and Mariners, two surprise teams for Baseball Reference, but the Yankees, the White Sox, the Athletics, a little bit more of a shakeup there. I accept that from Baseball Reference. So transitioning over to the National League, starting out in the NL East, Stratomatic, Washington at the top, followed by the Atlanta Braves. That seems about fair. The Phillies right around the 500 mark. Washington, I don't think they're going to be 22-11 good. I certainly have them with that pitching staff right around the mix. Baseball Reference seems to agree with myself, has Washington at 17-16, 5 games back of the 24-12 Atlanta Braves at the top of the list there. So they're much higher on the Braves for Baseball Reference than they are for Stratomatic. Transitioning to the NL Central, Chicago Cubs, Stratomatic. I just don't see it. They have them at the top still, playing good baseball, 22-13. Everybody else bundled up with St. Louis and Milwaukee. I guess that division really is open for the taking, but I tend to agree with Baseball Reference where they have the Cardinals at the top and then the Pirates and Reds following. But the Cardinals, I would bet, have a little bit of a higher chance at being where they're at this current point than the Cubbies, but who knows? Theo Epstein may have to change his outlook on the squad if they start out 22-13 and make a little bit of a run. The NL West wrapping up the divisions. LA Dodgers, yes, Stratomatic at the top. The San Diego Padres, and then Arizona. San Diego figuring things out a little bit, but not according to Baseball Reference. They have them still at 10-24 with the Dodgers way out in front. So Dodgers, Cardinals, Braves. Can't say you can argue with that. And then a wild card mix of the Rockies, and then the Diamondbacks are right there, followed by the Mets and the Pirates. On the Stratomatic side, we got the Cubbies, the Nationals, the Dodgers, and then in the wild card spot, Atlanta and San Diego. So different playoffs, and that's where I'd be curious as to which one is more likely to come true out of the two of these guys. But transitioning over into some individual stats, starting out offensively, Stratomatic, people have come back to earth. We're no longer up around the 400 mark when it comes to exactly, where they think people are going to be. They got Jimenez with the White Sox hitting 361. Charlie Blackmon for Colorado hitting 358. Edman, 358 in St. Louis. Andrews, 355. So let's see here. 7 guys hitting over 350. But nobody higher than 361 as they had guys up around 400 earlier in the year. So, they've come back here as we hit May. That first month was fun, but now people are getting more realistic. Carlos Santana leads the league in doubles with 15. Manny Machado right there with 14. When it comes to home runs, Trevor Story has 13. Soler with Kansas City has 12. Bryce Harper has 12. And then Hiura with the Mets has 12, and then a bunch of others tied with 10. So those are your top 4. Nelson Cruz leads the way with RBIs with 35 for Minnesota, followed by Soler and Harper at 33. So a good start for Bryce Harper with 12 and 33. I think Phillies fans locally would be very pleased with those types of numbers, and I think he was ready for a big year. So I don't disagree with those. Brett Gardner, 29 RBIs, and so on and so forth. But leading the league in strikeouts is Santana, for Cleveland with 53. Martinez in Boston has 52. JD. Then Chavez has 52. So, high for those guys. Hopefully JD Martinez isn't thinking, he's slowing down here a little bit. Transitioning over to Baseball Reference offensively. Tops batting average 387 for Jose Peraza in Boston. He's trailed only by .001. Tommy Edman hitting 386. Ketel Marte hitting 358 in Arizona. Xander Bogaerts and Dahl over 350. So 6 guys hitting over 350, but the top guy still at 387 for Baseball Reference. On base percentage, that's Mike Trout leading away at 453. When you're talking OPS, Mike Trout's at the top at 1102. Torres, Alvarez, Lindor, Soto, Moncada, all the standard characters who you'd think all just trailing right behind him. Still over 1,000 though, putting together tremendous offensive seasons. Nolan Arenado, he's tied with Franmil Reyes and Johan Moncada with 13 home runs. Quite a few with 12, although I don't see Bryce Harper on this side of things. So Baseball Reference not as high on Harper. Yordan Alvarez continues to lead the way with RBIs with 43, followed by Torres, Arenado, and Lindor. Wrapping up here this segment talking about pitching stats. Blake Snell wins the Players League. Best ERA in the league here according to Stratomatic at .59. He's followed by Strasburg, Cole, and Kershaw. So no real surprises there when it comes to the top of the top, that's for sure. Kennedy in Kansas City leading the league in saves as well. Let's see here if we can find strikeouts. There we go. We got Garrett Cole with 79, followed by Snell, DeGrom, Nola, and Bieber. So nice to see Aaron Nola on that list as a Phillies fan, but Garrett Cole leading the league in strikeouts. And let's round things out with Baseball Reference. We're talking about pitchers. Madison Bumgarner, a 1.38 ERA. Hey, there you go. Lucas Giolito, not only in the finals in the Players League, but number 2 in the league in ERA when it comes to Baseball Reference. So they're high. They don't have Blake Snell here on this side, but they're high on one of the contestants there. Dallas Keuchel pitching well for the White Sox at a 1.80 ERA. That's part of the reason why they're at the top of the division, that's for sure. Top in the wins, Justin Verlander with 6 on the year. Kenley Jansen, he's bouncing back for LA with 10 saves. Aroldis Chapman has 10 for the Yankees. Will Smith has 10 for Atlanta. And Diaz has 10 for Colorado. Strikeouts here, Garrett Cole's in second place. Justin Verlander, those two battled it out last year for the tops. Verlander's got 73. Cole's got 69. Scherzer, Bieber, Giolito, and so forth. So, not a ton of surprises again when it comes to the individual names. A lot of the characters who you would suspect having solid years, but it's just fun to kind of follow along the team games and see the computers continue to have disagreements on the same teams. But that wraps up this segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sister shows as well as one of our sponsors. When we come back, we'll wrap up today's episode with our final segment. Stick around, guys. It's a good one.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. This is episode number 185 of the Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. Shout out once again to you guys, the listeners out there. I recently put a post out in regards to our downloads for the month of April. They were up from January, so I appreciate you guys spreading the word, help grow the love of the Baseball Podcast. But as you guys listen, head to Facebook, follow us there, Twitter. That way you can interact with the show. We can continue to be a community here within the Baseball Podcast because I'm very much enjoying bringing you guys content, quality content and quality episodes. And I think we had that here today. Wrapping up today's episode, we talked about the latest reports about the preferred plan and how they want baseball and all the home games and the home stadiums as much as possible. Well, yeah, I want that too. I just don't think it's realistic. But that's the report from a gentleman by the name of Mark Topkin out of the Tampa Bay Times. I just think we're going to be in some sort of a split squad. The three locations of Florida, Texas, and Arizona honestly sound the most realistic, at least until we get to August, September. But if you're going to want to be back sooner than later, I think it's what we're going to need. We then talked about the Players League. Blake Snell ultimately winning the Players League. MLB The Show video games. Super impressive from start to finish for Blake. It was a lot of fun to watch him win that and watch the finals against Lucas Giolito where he swept 3-0. We then talked about the NL Central. I ranked the best teams in Cubs, Reds, Brewers, Pirates, and Cardinals history. And then ultimately in the fourth segment put them numbers 1 through 5, where the 1970s reigned supreme. The 76 Reds, followed by the 71 Pirates, are the top two in that division. And then last segment we talked about the simulations that are taking place, giving you guys an update on everything that's going on. But for the sixth and final segment here, to have a little bit of fun, recording this Sunday night, I myself, being a sports fan, not only a baseball fan like yourself, I'm sure you're watching the Last Dance documentary about Michael Jordan and the 1998 Chicago Bulls. Well, we're finding out a lot more about the rest of the 90s versions of the Bulls, which I enjoyed. I didn't want it to just be about that 1 year. I kind of wanted it to be about the dynasty. And they haven't talked on it yet, but since Michael Jordan's in the limelight, everybody's talking about it, I figured why not talk about his baseball career? Why not look back on that one summer where Mike decided to hang him up and, play baseball? And again, the backstory was, 1994, I believe, was the summer he played. So, his father had passed away. And he apparently had lost the drive for basketball or his love for the sport. And because his father's greatest love was the sport of baseball, that's where Mike was going to step away after a three-peat and go chase a baseball career, because pretty much saying, hey, I've done this with basketball, so let's go see what we can do on the baseball side. And now, knowing more, with the general manager of the Bulls, he was an ex-scout for the White Sox, so it made sense as to that relationship, how he ended up within the White Sox organization, ended up playing in Double-A. But most recently, there was a report that came out that Michael Jordan passed on a major league contract from the Oakland A's so that he could, quote, do the baseball thing from the ground up. Just a fascinating story here when you're reading a little bit more of it. But here's a little blurb, quote, you recall when Jordan stopped playing basketball and decided to try baseball and ultimately went down to the Birmingham Balance, the Chicago White Sox affiliate. When I heard that was happening or about to happen, I called his agent right away and said, hey, look, I understand he may be going to Double-A. I don't even know who the 25th man on our major league team is right now. I will sign him and put him on the major league roster. He'll be part of our 25-man team tomorrow. This was the Oakland A's general manager at the time, basically calling, let's see who it was. It was Sandy Alderson called up Michael's agent and said, don't send him to Double-A. Let's bring him right to the bigs. Again, quote, it wasn't about we've got a spot for him, he's got a particular skill. That wasn't the idea. The idea was we've got Michael Jordan on our team and the interest that would have generated. And the Oakland A's, everybody knows Moneyball. The A's continue to not have a lot of income to be able to put a lot of money into the team. So just a fascinating side of things that where you hear, hey, he's going to Double-A. You know what? We'll put him right on the big league roster. We need fannies in the stands. We need people to show up to these games. So bring them on. Let's go. This is what we need. It's just, I couldn't imagine seeing him in the major leagues with the Oakland A's, knowing what we know now when it comes to what happened in the minor leagues. But that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit, just kind of his baseball stats. It was only one summer. Michael Jordan, 1994, he was 31 years old, playing in Double-A. Clearly old for that age. He's 7 years older than the average player at age 24, playing in Birmingham for the White Sox affiliate. He played in 127 games that summer, had just under 500 plate appearances for 436 at-bats. He hit .202 that year. He had 88 hits in 436 at-bats. He had 17 doubles, so not bad. Gap-to-gap power, 17 of 88 going for doubles here. He had 1 triple and 3 home runs, so 21 out of the 48 hits, about 25%. Going for extra bases for his airness. He had 51 RBIs. He had 30 stolen bases. So, that's where people talk about Jordan not being that athlete. I saw the other day, if he were to run the 40, I think he ran it sub 4.4. People were clocking it or watching film and going to the MPHs, but I think he was 4.39 or something like that. He had excellent speed. So stole 30 bags. He just didn't have great baseball acumen, which led to him getting caught 18 times. So he was only 30 for 48, but the fact that he tried 48 times is a real good amount in 127 games. So anytime Mike was on first base, he was trying to take second. He did have 51 walks to 114 strikeouts, over 2-to-1 ratio there for strikeouts to walks. Best case, you want to be 1-to-1. The best of the best are the other way around, but his on-base percentage only .289, slugging .266, so his OPS .556. So not a lot of power there. The steals and speed would have been his game in Double-A. But let's see his defense. They had him registered fielding. He was an outfielder. He had 11 errors for a .952 fielding percentage. That sounds about right when it comes to the outfield. 230 chances, 213 putouts. He did have 6 outfield assists, it looks like. He was able to throw out some runners. So I haven't seen any film on what type of arm Michael Jordan had, but 6 outfield assists, that's not too bad in 119 games, so must have been a designated hitter his other time around. But just for reference sake, let's see, Mike hit .202 in Double-A. I wanted to pull up Tim Tebow. He's just the other guy who I can think of, really played one sport all of his life and then wanted to try baseball. Transitioning over to some of his statistics here in Double-A, he hit .273, so he hit a little bit better in Double-A at age 30. So very similar ages when they're doing this, but only 6 home runs, 36 RBIs. Once again, 22 walks to 103 strikeouts, so 4-to-1 for Tim Tebow trying to put the ball in play. And then this past summer, Timmy, he was at Triple-A, hitting 163. So really, really dropped off when it came to Double-A to Triple-A. Let's see, 20 walks to 98 strikeouts. So still really struggling to put the ball in play. 4 homers in 77 games. So better Double-A for Tim Tebow, but by the time he got to Triple-A down to 163, Mike decided to jump right into Double-A. If he had warmed up maybe an A-ball and then was able to move up to Double-A, could have been a little bit better. Then decided to step away from baseball. Ultimately goes back to basketball, wins 3 more titles, and just a fascinating story. But again, watching The Last Dance, I said, hey man, let's look at his baseball stats. Let's dive into his airness, see how he did on the diamond. If it was truly as bad as we remember, because kids my age, 30 years old, we remember Space Jam. We remember him striking out, everybody, cheering anyway, because he was Michael Jordan and nobody cared. So, that's kind of our memory of Mike, really, and only his failures, because before and after that, 3 titles. It's tough to argue. But that wraps up today's episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I had a ton of fun talking with you guys today, talking everything from coronavirus to the best of the best in the NL Central, And then even here in this last segment, diving into Michael Jordan statistics. And Tim Tebow made an appearance. I didn't think we'd be talking anything Tim Tebow when the episode started or the segment started, but that's where we ended up. And hopefully you guys enjoyed the ride out there. So shout out to you guys once again for continuing to spread the word and grow the podcast. The traffic is up. You guys don't know how much I appreciate it as I continue to be able to bring you guys content like this. If you guys continue to listen and continue to share, we can go on this journey together. So shout out to the healthcare workers one more time out there, keeping everybody safe, putting your lives on the line. We love you guys. We love all of you. Whether we know you or not, we're cheering for you here. But that's it. Once again, episode 185. I am Kevin Mahalik. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Enjoy your night, everyone. We'll talk to you later this week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.